name's Finbarr, Bermingham. I work as the Asia editor of Global Trade Review based in Hong Kong. Global Trade Review is a magazine about trade finance, and I've been working there for 3 years, and what a lot has changed in those 3 years. 3 years ago when I first moved to Hong Kong, the word FinTech barely registered. It barely caused a ripple on the wider trade finance industry, but now it's everywhere, and I mean, I guess this event is really testament to how much it's grown. The interest that is in FinTech, specifically for trade finance, is huge. We are in the midst, I guess, in this industry of a technological revolution. If we put a story about blockchain or about AI in trade finance on our website, you know, it's by far and away the most read category. Tends to go crazy, and a lot of those stories are emanating out of this part of the world, Asia, and more specifically Singapore. And this week we had what I would describe as the mother of all announcements with the Global Trade Connectivity Network. So congratulations to everybody who's been involved in that. We really look forward to seeing how that will unfold, and no doubt we will hear a lot more about it from the people on the panel today. Just before I hand over to my panelists to give themselves a short introduction, a reminder that you can submit questions via the, I think, Pigeonhole, am I right? The Pigeonhole app, which you can access through the festival's app itself, and I will read the best ones out and offer them over to our panelists. I'm delighted to be joined by such an illustrious group, real array of talent here, with great insights into the tech and the trade finance industry, and it should make for a fascinating discussion. I'll hand over to Shu-pui first. Maybe you can give yourself a brief introduction, a couple of lines about who you are, what you do, and why you're on this panel.
Okay, my name is Shu-pui Lee. I'm the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. I'm responsible for the financial market infrastructure development, implementation, and policy of Hong Kong. At the same time, I also look after the FinTech facilitation office of the HKMA. The major objective is to facilitate the FinTech development in Hong Kong, as well as to build an ecosystem in Hong Kong. Now we are, working with Shenzhen, the Bay Area, try to expand the ecosystem to cover the Bay Area as well. So that's what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here, but I'm invited to be here.
We know why you're here. We'll talk about that later. Thanks. Bernard, you can go next.
Hello, I'm Bernard. I'm also in the FinTech group in MAS, but I also, like Shu-pui, am responsible for developing Singapore's financial market, and trade finance is an incredibly interesting asset class, and it's also becoming more interesting as an asset class for non-bank investors. I think later on, Chye might even talk about that as well. But yeah, so that's what I do.
Thanks. Gianfranco?
So I'm responsible for the Accenture business in Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa, Latin America. So what my colleagues say in Europe and North America, I'm building the future while they are taking care of the present. And I keep telling them that the future is now here and is big. And FinTech is a big part of it. And in fact, we have 3 of our FinTech hubs in Asia Pacific, Singapore being one of them. And FinTech is extremely important for Accenture overall. We will have the opportunity to talk about that later.
Thanks, Gianfranco. And Chye?
Thanks, Finbarr. So my name is Chye. I'm the CEO and chairman of Tin Hill Capital. What we do is we develop platforms to help banks to sell down their trade finance assets to another bank, another insurer, and another fund manager. And before this, I was the vice chairman for Barclays Bank and head of trade for Standard Chartered.
Thanks, everybody. And look, I think it's worth opening with some thoughts on why is trade finance so ripe for a revolution? I mean, I've got a couple of lines here to read out. The Bill of Lading has been in use since 1675, and I'm pretty sure none of us were around there. Then, the letter of credit has been traced back to ancient Egypt by some scholars, probably not in its current form, but not far off it, I wouldn't hazard a guess. Chye, you've been working in this industry for a long, long time. Maybe you can explain very briefly a couple of the points of trade finance. Why is trade finance in the dark ages, and what can what problems can blockchain, can FinTech generally solve for this industry?
All right, so I've noted your comment about very briefly. I can go on this topic for more than an hour,
know.
right? So very briefly, I would say that, there are obviously many challenges around trade and trade finance. I'll focus on a couple of points. The first one I'll focus on is the entire regulatory environment that has changed quite significantly in the last 5 to 10 years. I know a lot been said about KYC. Personally, I think KYC is less of an issue for trade or trade finance. Banks normally do not get into trouble with KYC. What banks get into trouble, what the industry find it hard to comply with, is really the KYT challenges. Knowing your transactions rather than knowing your customer. Knowing your customer is a once-a-year event, all right? You do it once a year, and the other 364 days in a year, you kind of passively manage that. KYT is different. You manage it every day of the year, all right? As long as you do a trade, you need to manage it. And the quantity of paper and the quantity of data that does not help, right? And that kind of moves on to my second point, and that is the issue and the challenge with paper and the digitization of paper. Now, I know a lot been said about digitization of paper from legal enforceability of that. I think that in the case of trade finance, legal enforceability of a digital paper is less of an issue. I think what is more important is actually capturing the digital data that is contained in that piece of paper. All right? If we are able to capture the data significantly better than what we are doing today, I believe we will be able to manage the transaction significantly better than what we are doing today, both from a regulatory perspective and from a productivity and a practice perspective. Lastly, I'm actually very delighted to be invited to this platform. All right, this particular a panel discussion, especially with our colleagues from HKMA and MAS on the panel. And why do I say this? All right, digitization can happen quite quickly in the area of the B2C business or peer-to-peer business. Digitization can be a massive challenge when it comes to B2B business. And I actually think that, without a strong regulatory push, without a strong regulatory push or a push, I fear that adoption will not be moving at a pace that we would like. All right. So from that perspective, I'm actually delighted, with the announcement from MAS and HKMA about the joint project that both of you are launching. And I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the audience. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah. As I said before we came on stage, we are the supporting cast today, and these gentlemen are going to be the star of the show. I know everybody's very keen to hear about the new announcement, and we will come on to that. But Chye, just before I move on, just to illustrate the sort of the state of the trade finance business, how long does it take generally to process and do a transaction, a trade finance transaction currently?
Now, so let me quote an example that I repeated many, many times. So for some of you that may have heard this before, my apologies. Now, how long does it take to for a ship to travel from Singapore to Jakarta? A day? How long does it take to send a set of documents from Singapore to Jakarta that's going through the banking system? A week. So you think about it, it's kind of bizarre, right? The ship is so big and bulky and heavy, and we know how slow the ship moves, and it takes a day to reach Jakarta. A set of documents, all right? And DHL claims that they can deliver it one day. But the banking system, or the entire ecosystem, I won't say the banking system, the entire ecosystem takes a week.
It's pretty ridiculous state of affairs, but we're on the way to remedying that, I hope. Gianfranco, let's move to you. And from your work with Accenture, I'm wondering what potential do you see in the current FinTech developments to be applied to trade finance? Which are you most enthusiastic about? Are there any sort of solutions that you've seen? Generally, what of the disruptive tech are you most enthusiastic about?
So there is a lot of hype, and there is good reason to have to be optimistic on the future of fintech, and in particular, what we have debated in the last few days is the use of blockchain in the context of finance trade. I like to make reference to Project Ubin, and I know it's not the first time we mentioned that throughout this FinTech festival. I think the Project Ubin, under the leadership of the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Association of Bank of Singapore, is a groundbreaking project that allows us to envision the fact that, yes, you can create complex transactions, settle complex transactions in a very complex environment in a way which is trustworthy, protecting privacy, and proven in terms of end-to-end regulations. What is also promising and encouraging is the fact that we've done that in 3 different ways, using 3 different platforms. And every single platform has returned a positive outcome. So when I see this happening, I say, okay, now it's for real. We are moving from the stage of proof of concept to real adoption. And what I can envision, Finbarr, is that the financial sector is the leading sector. I think is the sector where the regulators, the banks, the institutions have realized the power of blockchain, and they are making substantial investments. And this will be the sector that will, the industry that will move at pace ahead of the others. But I can tell you now that logistics, governments, manufacturing will follow. There is such a significant benefit in all these sectors in terms of how you can go through one point to the other seamlessly and in real time that it's inevitable that this will be the evolution. The point is that regulators and financial institutions seems to be the ones that have captured the idea and are putting significant attention, brain, energy and money to make this happen. And I really applaud to the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the ABS for being leading edge and such a visionary and relentless in the execution, because this is really groundbreaking.
It is amazing how progressive. And look, one thing I've been impressed, and we discussed this before, is with a project like Ubin, wasn't in the works. You know, it didn't take that long to get it developed. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months maybe. And I think like in many parts of the world that would take 3 years. And I think that is really sort of telling that the MAS is getting things done. It's not making announcements willy-nilly. It's making announcements about things that it will get done on the HKMA, of course. And I feel like I feel like it's very impressive when I look, because I'm also, of course, covering other parts of the world, and it just isn't as progressive as that. And that brings us on to the Monetary Authority on the panel. Bernard, we'll start with you. Fantastic week. Some very, very interesting announcements. Maybe you can, for those who aren't aware, maybe you can talk us through brief synopsis of the Global Trade Connectivity Network, what the plan is, and what you hope to achieve with this project.
Sure. So in the Global Trade Connectivity Network, there are 3 parts. There is trade, there is the digital ledger, so it's a DLT, and there's international connectivity, and that's the 3 parts. 3 parts: trade, DLT, and international connectivity. I'm going to break it down into the individual parts. For trade, where we started off, our journey actually started about three years ago, and I got my customs colleagues in the audience, I must give credit to them. They operate, and Singapore operates 2 platforms today. There's TradeNet for permit declarations, which is a national single window for permit declarations, and there's Trade Exchange, the trade and logistics platform. And we needed to build a new platform, a new next generation platform. We thought very hard about what we could do with all the data on it, because we wanted to build a virtuous cycle to get more shippers, more freight forwarders, more companies, more SMEs, more MNCs to participate on a trade info ecosystem. And the natural community to bring onto trade are the banks, trade finance. You can't break up trade from trade finance. So we formed a trade finance working committee with several of our bank colleagues to develop use cases, to develop business requirements. What would make sense for the financial community to recycle, reuse data on this trade info ecosystem. And so with the banks, we developed two modules. One is a multi-blank platform, and another one is a compliance module. And that will be rolled out as part of the national trade platform later this year. But it really, I think the process of bringing together communities of users, trying to understand pain points it's an interesting learning process for us. Learning how incentives work for banks and for MNCs. And the pain points for MNCs and SMEs are very different, and bringing them on is very different. And besides trade finance, besides the trade platform, obviously there are other innovations going on in trade finance. Chye CCRM is another one. But so that covers trade. But you can't talk about trade without talking about trust, because trade finance is about trust. There are two types of trade finance, basically. One is documentary trade, where the importer and exporter don't really trust each other. And then there is open account, where the banks have to build trust with their clients. And if you look at, and this brings me to the second part about what I'm going to cover, which is DLT. Because DLT is about a technology that is used to build trust, where trust may or may not exist, right? And when you look at the POCs that have been carried out on trade finance using DLT, whether it is duplicate invoice financing, again bridging the trust gap. If you look at LCs, again bridging the trust gap, right? Purchase order creation. There are so many POCs, we just decided that enough of POCs, let's put things into production, because this is the year. And I anticipate there's going to be a question, because every single panel I attend, there is a question, when will we see DLT being put into production systems? So we decided, and you've seen in our press release, we committed ourselves early 2019 into putting the Global Trade Connectivity Network into production. So, and besides trade finance, we've, right, Finbarr talked about, and everybody, we've been talking about Project Ubin, central bank digital currency on digital ledger technology, right? So there are many use cases for DLT, and we wanted to just get it done. But the most important part about trade is that it has to be cross-border. Over 60% of our trade finance is actually it's offshore to offshore. It's not even onshore offshore. Yeah, most trade is between. So you really can't talk about trade or trade finance without thinking about where your exporter or importer is, right? And if you look at Asia, the two shining, the most international financial centers, the biggest trade hubs, Hong Kong, Singapore, right? It's natural, and not only natural, but there are so many experiments that were happening between banks in Hong Kong and Singapore, between banks in Hong Kong and Singapore. The natural question that we had to answer to our community, because when our community wants to work with both Hong Kong and Singapore, both HKMA and MAS, because the two markets which are most ready as well are Hong Kong and Singapore. And the message we wanted to get out for a while already, in fact, because we've had about 4 workshops by now, between the banks and the two monetary authorities. And the message we wanted to get out was, when you work with one of us, you work with both of us. And that's why we thought it was very important to assure all our stakeholders, banks, fintech companies, vendors, that there is a new area of competition. We tell all our banks and fintech companies that fintech is about collaboration, and collaboration fosters a new way of competition. And so we have to collaborate, and that's why we signed an MOU yesterday. But I'll let Shu-pui finish the story, because otherwise he might have nothing left to say.
Go ahead, Shu-pui.
Okay, thank you. It's funny that I've been with the HKMA for going to the 17 years. Before October this year, I think in the past 16 something years, I have never sat in a panel with MAS before, from my recollection, okay? But within less than a month, we were in the same panel in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong FinTech Week on the 25th of October. Now we are together again. Okay, and then we always compete. Okay, it's fact, okay. I think it's good. Whenever they make an announcement, they have 11 initiatives. Our chief executive will come after us. What should we do? Have we been doing this? What are the new things? I think probably it's the same thing happening in MAS. I think it's good that we keep going. That's the motivation that we need to do more, particularly for FinTech. I mean, we cannot just sit back and wait things for happening. Okay, coming back to the trade finance project, it's very exciting. I'm not a trade expert, honestly. I'm a central banker. I was with banking supervision, financial infrastructure, but I got no idea about trade. Okay, but I started learning about a year ago. And then my sort of experience, the journey I have gone through, blockchain, DLT is a breakthrough. When we did the proof of concept in Hong Kong with 5 banks, we were looking for a use case. The first example or first use case, the banks told us that we got to try trade finance. Okay, I mean, fair enough. We just want to test out the value proposition of the technology. Okay, pick trade finance. And then we also pick a couple others, for testing. After the proof of concept, I mean, we finished it by beginning of this year. Banks were very excited. They saw the opportunity. And then at that time, I was like, okay, by all means, go on. You continue your commercialization. But the bank said that we found an authority to lead and facilitate it forward. It won't happen. So I learned 2 things. I mean, the technology is a breakthrough, okay, to sort of give an opportunity for trade finance to fly. And they told us that in the last 20 to 30 years, banks, industry, logistics, shipping company, or technology vendors, they tried every single way, but they failed. Now they see the opportunity. But without any authority to come out to lead the development, the chance of success will be less. So at that time, okay, and I think the timing is good because of FinTech. If you came to a regulator 5 years ago, ask the regulator or the central bank authority to facilitate technological development, working with industry together to develop things. I won't say it's impossible, but it's difficult. But now you see things happening around the world. So the timing is excellent, that coming. So we start working in Hong Kong, and then initially thought, okay, they said trade must be international. No point to do domestic. Hong Kong is too small. And all trades basically cross-border. And then we thought, okay, how to make that happen? How to build an international infrastructure. If we build one in Hong Kong, will somebody from Japan, from UK, from Europe, from the US will join us? I think the chance is, okay, there may be a chance, but not, it will take a long time. So it happened, Singapore was doing proof of concept as well, and then we came together. Honestly, I have to be frank, we have been speaking with a lot of central banks in the world. I don't want to name them. Quite a number of them did not understand what we were talking about, okay? But these guys, they are very ready. When we sat down, I don't think we spent long. We knew that that's the direction. Let's put things down, put our foot down, pull our finger out, make something happen. So we have, since I think middle of this year, we had another meeting. We draw banks together and then, work together, work out the mission objective. Then we signed the MOU this week and then formalize the whole structure. This morning we had 3 hours meeting, okay, with banks, agreed a lot of things, and then we will go for the request for proposal next year and then get the platform done. Although Rafi made the speech on Tuesday, said the launch date will be beginning of 2019. But this guy had got an internal deadline, but I don't want to mention it here. But anyway, Okay, just want to mention 4 points. Okay, my lessons learned from this thing, or challenges. First, I probably say this project is the first in the world. And we have 7 banks in Hong Kong as the founding members, of the domestic platform in Hong Kong. There are another 10 banks at least knocking at the door. Can I come in? Can I come in? But we don't want to make the structure too complicated. We've got to work our way to allow more banks join in. The cross-border connectivity, okay, and then we have potentially 2 infrastructure then joining together, and then Singapore have a number of banks. If we add up all these banks together, easily 20-something banks, okay, and then we are as well talking with other jurisdictions. Once we get the showcase or the conceptual model done in a few months, then we will start promoting to other jurisdictions, and that will be a global thing. According to my understanding or my search from on the internet, I don't think I can find any similar project in the world. We're probably the first, number 1. Number 2, if we can agree and set the standard for the whole platform and the processes, the document, digitization, etc., again, easily we can be the first to set the international standard for the trade thing on a DLT trade finance platform. And then number 3, we are facing a very difficult technological challenge. We spent quite a bit of time this morning to discuss that. Hong Kong, okay, we are about to select the technology, the service provider. And then there will be one technology. Definitely there will be one technology, okay? Now there are probably 3 in the world, and China is doing their own proprietary technology for DLT as well. There may be many in future. So if we pick technology A, but this GTCN picks technology B, the interoperability issue, we got to tackle that. I don't think there are any commercial application or major critical application have solved that problem yet. A lot of talks, a lot of theory, how the 2 technology can integrate or interoperate with each other. And then we got to make sure our GTCN is an open architecture. In future, if there's another technology C and D, they can plug in easily. Very huge challenge. We don't have a solution now. We run the vendors. Okay, a lot of Accenture, or the vendors here. We need your help to provide us a solution. And also the data privacy issue, because banks really want that if I do a transaction with, say, between 2 of us, they don't want any others participants know there's a transaction. Don't even have a record of that. Okay, that's also another challenge. And technology may be able to do that, but in terms of scalability, performance, we don't know. Because if we put eventually hundreds of participants in the infrastructure, and then there's so many transactions, so many sort of transaction flowing across these participants, how to protect them, how to keep the secrecy. That's the 3rd thing, technological challenge. The 4th, the problem for 2 of us. To apply DLT to that sort of critical, if it becomes successful, it will be a critical financial infrastructure. Okay, using DLT. And then very likely, I think the chance of using cloud, I believe relatively high chance. So to apply DLT and cloud service to your mission critical applications, financial applications, I think the regulator, the supervisor need to think, what will be the regulatory requirements? How are we going to tell banks you got to do this, so that I feel comfortable? I don't think we have worked out that yet. But that's a challenge for us, and also we may need the market to help. Anyway, I better stop here.
Yeah, sounds like a busy year you've got ahead, you two. But look, I just had a couple of very quick questions about the platform itself. I mean, this strikes me as something that would work, the more participants you have, the better, right? The more corridors this has, the better. What would be the plans to look beyond Hong Kong and Singapore? Do you have any sort of markets in mind that you could add to this network? Are those discussions ongoing?
Maybe I say a few words first, and then Bernard can add in. This morning we were asked by the same question by banks, because they think if it's just Singapore and Hong Kong, it's not good enough. Okay, definitely we will expand, and we will do the joint marketing first of all, we've got to develop some sort of marketing material and then let people easily understand what we are talking about, what we are working at. The plan is, I think in the next 3-4 months, once we have done the RFP and then we know exactly the ultimate model is, and then we will do some sort of marketing material, and then we will work out the jurisdiction. I think for sure we need MAS to help to target the ASEAN countries. We definitely will target China, okay? And then the European country, we got to look at the plan how, because we see in a lot of international committees, we have contact with them, okay? But to be fair, I think not many of them are ready at this point of time. But when they see the progress made by Singapore and Hong Kong, and then they start understanding a bit more, it will be easier for them because we can sort of showcase them, you know, this is the model, this is the way it works. If you come in, we can help you, you know, how to facilitate your jurisdiction or your market to do similar thing.
So I think there are 3 parts. It's very good to work in 3s because it helps you remember how many things you want to say. I know you worked in 4s, but... So, Finbarr, to your question, we're going to expand to more banks. I think absolutely. We had to start small, but we picked the banks with the largest volumes of trade finance in each of our markets. And in fact, many of them are common because they're regional banks. And you do need to work with a few because you want to move quickly. But you have to have some confidence that their views will represent most of the other banks because they are the ones who handle the most volume. They're the ones who have been in the business the longest time. But at the end of the day, we are planning to roll out to every bank. But there's one more aspect, which is my second point, is that because our NTP will be a super node on the GTCN, and we have non-banks, we have corporates, I talked about MNCs and SMEs. I think that it's very important to deliver value to the real economy because trade finance is about trade and the economy. So I think we have to bear in mind, it has to be useful to the economy. The third part, corridors. Shu-pui is absolutely right. I think Hong Kong has a natural hinterland called China. Singapore has a natural hinterland called ASEAN. And South Asia is our hinterland. But we should also remember there are other markets. When we think about international corridors, it's not just the volume of trade, not just the volume of trade finance, it is also the readiness. I talked about readiness. And one market that is super ready, we are we can't ignore, large, ready. Japan is very interesting. And I think that we can't ignore the developed markets in Asia as well.
And it brings us on to a question from the audience, which I'll open up to the panel. Somebody has asked, banks have worked on a multitude of proof of concepts with regards to trade blockchain. Each proof of concept in itself is not effective without a proper network. Are there plans for a unifying platform to bring it all together? Now, this strikes me as perhaps the platform that this person may be talking about. Is this a platform through which banks can, you know, collaborate in terms of blockchain development, their own blockchain work, or will this sort of sit outside of that? I think that was the point of the question. And is this the platform that we need for banks to start going live with blockchain? And I'll open that to the other guys on the panel as well, if they wish.
I try to understand the question. You mean the platform for trade finance or platform for blockchain to apply to any?
Well, it's for trade finance, yeah, for trade finance.
Okay. I think our GTCN is a perfect solution because our aim, that's the discussion this morning, it got to be an open architecture. Yeah. Okay, and then in terms of connectivity, it can be connected to any technology, DLT technology, okay? If there's an ABCD, then we need to make sure it can be connected to ABCD, even a non-DLT platform. So that's the aim, okay? Otherwise, I mean, how can we connect over the world? I mean, we want to build a global connectivity infrastructure. So that's the thing we want to do.
Yeah. Gianfranco, how does this compare to and I mean you work across the region and elsewhere in the world, how does the work going on here compare to what you see in other jurisdictions?
Well, this is definitely one of the most advanced we see. So what we are working on now is we achieved some results that have been communicated this week, is that we have made different platforms working, either in parallel or together, and see whether they could come to the same conclusion, and that has been positively proven. So that, to me, and in our opinion, takes away one of the issues that is about whether we need common standards or whether different platforms can interoperate and communicate. A lot still to be done, but the first evidence is that yes, it is possible to achieve similar results, same results through different platforms, and that simplifies a lot the scheme of do we need all to adhere to have the same platform, the same standard or not? The answer is probably not, and I suspect that the next step that Hong Kong and Singapore are considering will prove that in a cross-border environment. To me, Finbarr, the problem is less the technology, is more the trust in the system. So you need to have the different regulators that come together and agree on the fact that there is a mutual trust in a cross-border system, because the technology will be able to achieve the goal the way it's been defined. The reason why I mentioned logistics before is I mean, it's clear that there is a strong similarity in between trade, settlements, and moving goods across, and the things will progress in parallel. I think that the industry will represent the next strong, the manufacturing. Think about food and traceability of food across the entire supply chain. These are the things that the blockchain technology will enable in parallel with real-time settlement. There is a convergence that will have to come to a point where trust and privacy and security are the points to tackle in the entire network. And technology is probably advanced, but is about the different authorities coming together and have a common view and a common acceptance of how this could work. That's why it's fantastic to hear that Hong Kong and Singapore will work together, because I want to believe that this is going to be like in any other sector. When there are markets that provide better services, more efficient at a better price, the market will impose an adoption above and beyond the markets that have started, and I'm very positive on that.
Yeah. And Chye, as the financier on the panel, what do you think is the most important functionality of this tool? You talked at the beginning of the panel about KYT, in fact, and we've had an audience question which is about that. Do you believe industry collaboration is a viable way to resolve real-time KYT problems? Do you think that this is one of the most important issues that this GTCN should be addressing and will address?
I think it's just one of the many. Yeah. All right. I don't think.
Which are you most enthusiastic about, excited about?
It's very hard to force rank them. All right. Now, but if you want me to force rank it, I would look at it from a slightly different perspective, and also from a perspective of responding to the earlier question. All right. It's less about, are we solving the KYC problem or the KYT problems? It's less so about the different type of blockchain technology or different technology platforms. It's more so about common standards. So let's use an analogy, right? It doesn't matter whether I use a mobile phone, an Apple phone or Android phone or a landline, we still can talk to each other because there's common standards. All right. So I do feel that once you have common standards, a lot of the problems can be solved. All right, and it need not be restricted by what kind of technology that we use to solve the problems. And once you have common standards, the standards can be applied. You can say that we're creating a standards for messaging. But actually, a common standard for messaging can be used to solve KYC, KYT problems, can be used to remove the paper, can be used to improve productivity, and the list goes on and on. So, I want to go back to one of the last points I made in my opening remarks. I have this great fear that if you leave it to the market, the standards will never evolve in today's world, all right? In a world when SWIFT was created, I do not know when that was, 20, 30 years ago, all right, whereby, we could get all financial institutions to agree on a common standard. I think those days are, by and large, way past us, all right? Leaving into the private sector to create a common standard is way past us. I do think that, while speaking as a private sector person, most of the time we do want the government to be hands-off on what we do. Creating standards is one that I think the government should be hands-on. All right? Leaving it to the market, it will take too long and we'll end up with too many different standards.
No worries, we are doing that.
But is that part of the motivation behind this? I mean, clearly, that's part of what you're doing here. You are harmonizing. You're bringing the industry together. You're bringing customs, shipping, banks, companies. I mean, is that part of your thinking? Is that we've got all these contacts. We've got the authority to do this. We've got the mandate. Surely that must be key in your thinking.
It won't happen in day one, but that's the aim. Okay, this morning we said it's not trade finance only, it's trade. But we can't do everything, within 1 year. So initially it will be trade finance for the banks, and then, but the platform, we agree that it got to be flexible. Okay, when we want to expand to cover more sort of participants or industries, that can be done. Okay, but it takes a little bit longer. But at least we cover the trade finance thing first, and then with the banks, bring in their buyers, sellers, their customer into the platform, and then with cross-border capability.
Absolutely. So when we think about the structure of what we're trying to build, we already envision having a standards committee, a business requirements committee, because as you build out the membership of the usage of the GTCN, you are going to have to create value for every additional member who's going to join and use the GTCN and standards as well. So we will, it's not just the HKMA and MES and just a few banks trying to do what we think is the best for the world, but we will and we are looking forward to including everyone.
They may be here.
Yeah, exactly. And we look forward to working with everyone at some point.
Look, somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was you, Bernard, we have seen a hell of a lot of proof of concepts over the past year. I mean, my inbox is full of them. The magazine's full of them as well. I'm wondering, obviously you're bringing your own project to fruition at the end of next year, early the year after. In your conversations with banks, and this is an open question to the panel, have we sort of moved beyond that testing pilot phase, proof of concept phase? Will 2018 be the year of production for blockchain in trade finance? And open to anybody who wishes to
I think the timeline has already been announced, so we cannot change it. I think the only thing we can do is deliver earlier.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you think of when the modules first started, right? Trade Safe was in 2015, I believe. So actually, the POCs that led to the creation of the GTCN started 2 years ago, and we are only beginning to think about production 3 years later. I think you can't skip the POC, POV phases if you want to build something in production, a platform in production, because and we're not saying that just because we're building the GCN means you don't need to do any more proofs of concept in DLT, because there are going to be so many use cases for DLT in the financial sector. Trade finance just happened to be the first one in Asia, as Shu-pui said.
It's a low-hanging fruit, really.
It wasn't that low, but it's going to be. I was just reminded yesterday that Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration, but it's 99% perspiration for the next 12 months, okay?
I look forward to catching up this time next year, see how your progress is. Chye, when you speak to your fellow financiers in the market, I mean, how enthusiastic is the financial sector and the trade finance sector about the work that's being done for these two organizations?
The short answer is very enthusiastic, all right? Now, for many years I've worked for big banks. Today I wear a different hat, right? I'm now in the category of a startup. I'm now in the category of an SME. While you work with all the big banks, I strongly urge both of you to think of us occasionally.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, in that sense, if I may, I think in the new world, the way these initiatives, these projects, these transformational programs can advance successfully is only if we are able to get the right network of startups and operators and put them in the value chain and have them contributing in a way which is not the way these initiatives were run in the past. It's a completely different way where rapid prototyping, agility in testing the results and fixing it, finding the right thinking and the right solution in the network of the startups is vitally important. If we miss that point and we pretend to go through a traditional waterfall project, we won't get there. So it's an important role that the network of the startups have to play.
Can I say this? The regulators are great in introducing the concept of sandbox. I think many banks need sandbox because the MPA process is killing the innovation from my perspective, all right? I just want to tell you, we live in a sandbox every day. All right. So we are, I think you just echo what's been said. I think the agility that a startup and SME can bring to the process is something that I will urge the two regulators to have a look at it.
Thanks. Shu-pui, can I just ask you, I mean, from the Hong Kong point of view, I mean, you see the enthusiasm here at the FinTech Week, and obviously in Hong Kong we had an event 3 weeks ago, something like that. Do you sense that there's a similar buzz around the city and around the sector for FinTech and for, I guess, for innovations such as these?
Yeah, sure. I think, there are many coming up as well. I mean, even in Shenzhen, in Guangzhou, in China. And then we see that the ecosystem is getting bigger and bigger. And then we actually see a lot of opportunities for tech firms as well. And then with better understanding by the global financial institutions that the importance of technology. And also, I think the government as well as the regulators, the central banks, we really want to be more proactive. And then we see a road, and then we hear a lot of comments that some of them are a little bit negative, but some of them are really constructive comments. And then we understand a bit more about a good regulation can actually help. A more transparent regulation, more sort of better communication or interpretation of the regulation will help the industry. So we actually learn a lot from the industry. Now I see the same thing happening in MAS as well, that a lot of initiatives basically is a facilitator. We want to facilitate the whole industry and also building the whole ecosystem. And I think one breakthrough in the last few months, I see more talks about collaboration. And I think if we don't collaborate, we cannot go far. We can go very fast, and then we can reach a certain point, but we will stop there. It's not sustainable. Now I really honestly think collaboration is important. If we keep saying, oh, I compete with Hong Kong compete with Singapore, and then we that particular figure data, it won't help. Okay, you may get the headline one day, but tomorrow, next day you don't know what to show. But with that kind of collaboration, we can actually make things happen and make things bigger as well. So we want to build a collaboration even bigger, connect with more jurisdictions that if we work together, good for the market as a whole.
Fantastic. Well, look, we're almost out of time, and I realize you two guys have got a serious deadline coming up, so we won't keep you any longer. Thank you very much to the panelists for their insights. Round of applause for these people, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to everybody for listening, and enjoy the rest of the festival.